Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of September 8th, and this is your Monday briefing. The House and Senate are in session this week, and the priority remains funding the government before September 30th deadline. Other tax policy items of note this week include House Ways and Means Committee Republicans are expected to meet privately with Treasury Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy Ken Keyes to review the implementation of provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And the Senate Finance Committee has also scheduled a hearing on Wednesday to consider two high-profile nominations, Don Korb for IRS Chief Counsel and Jonathan Greenstein for a senior Treasury role.
Trade policy is also still in play, especially after the Federal Circuit's decision right before the Labor Day holiday on President Trump's tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Joining us to discuss the implications for policy and economic numbers are Mark Prater and Karl Russo. Mark and Karl, welcome.
Pleasure to be here this morning, Sindhu.
Thank you.
So, Mark, let me start with you about the Federal Circuit's decision. So if you could talk a little bit about the outcome of the decision and what the immediate implications are on trade agreements that have already been reached and those which are still in negotiation.
So, Sindhu, here's where we are with the litigation. So when the president exercised his powers under the executive order and used the IEEPA as the basis for his actions, parties went to court who were aggrieved by that. The Court of International Trade is kind of like the trial court. It's kind of like the first step in the process. So the Court of International Trade heard the litigation, had hearings, asked questions, and then ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. The Court of International Trade said the president did not have the authority under IEEPA to put in place the trade tariffs, and also put in an injunction enjoining the administration from putting in place any more tariffs. So the administration, of course, appealed that to the appellate court, the court that we're talking about now, which is the Federal Circuit. And they, in effect, stayed the injunction and agreed to take the case. So they took the case up, went through the same process, hearings, took the pleadings, et cetera, and then they ruled August 29th, and they said they agreed with the Court of International Trade on the merits, so they agreed on the question that the president did not have the authority, from their point of view, to use that statute for tariffs. They said on the question of the injunction and the remedies that they remanded, which meant they sent it back to the Court of International Trade to kind of consider that question, the scope of those remedies. So that's still in that court. What's going to happen is the administration, who had kind of indicated that they might follow a regular path on this, then asked for expedited appeal to the Supreme Court. And so now we're in the place right now where the case is, you have two rulings on the merits, you have this question of the scope of the remedies, but then the clear path is to the Supreme Court to consider these big questions. What does that mean in terms of where we are right now on the negotiations, on the tariffs, the policy questions, et cetera? What it means is, of course, the parties are aware of it, but they're also aware that the administration has fallback positions in terms of other trade-related statutes that they could use to take a fallback position on the tariffs. So that's influencing it. So we're waiting the next steps with the Supreme Court. Clearly, everybody knows that this is a possibility. This is kind of hanging over the question of the president's authority.
So in terms of timing, let me ask you first. So the likelihood of it going to the Supreme Court is great. Is that what I'm hearing? So what are the next steps while we're waiting for that to happen, especially for companies? And I'm curious if companies are asking you about this, and what is the exact timeline?
So Sindhu, the court will decide when it wants to take the case, and then you'll have a process of briefs, motions, it's other things, and then oral argument, and then the court will rule. The court controls that, but of course, the administration has asked to speed up this question, so that may affect the timing on it. For the parties involved right now, the administration has not stopped negotiating, has not stopped considering these questions, and the other parties are still engaged in these negotiations. So the practical effect of this is it doesn't necessarily stop that part, but it does influence, of course, the parties' positions that they're negotiating. So our trading partners are still engaged. They're going through the process of the frameworks and then fleshing out the frameworks. So I think we can expect more of that. But certainly where the court comes down on this, and that could be in the spring, late spring, summer, could be earlier. Depends on what the court wants to do because it controls its docket.
Right.
Karl, if we could bring you into this, the tariffs that are in place and so far remain in place have been bringing in a rather large share of government revenue now, or an increasing share of government revenue. Can you talk a little bit about that magnitude and what the impact is for the overall federal budget?
Yeah, certainly, Scott. So compared to this time last year, customs duties are up about 112%, so more than doubled compared to the same period last year. And if you look at what's driving that, is the effective tariff rate has gone from something in the neighborhood of 3% to more than 11%, if you look at the tariff revenue raised on the imports that have come in during that particular month. If you look at just the month of August, we've seen even higher revenues coming in. There were additional tariff policies that went into place that were driving some of that. And we had more than $31 billion in customs receipts compared to less than $9 billion a year ago. And the Treasury Secretary has noted that and how it's a significant offset to the federal deficit. Over the course of a 10-year period, if you were to have all of these tariffs stay in effect, the CBO has said that would bring in more than $3.3 trillion of revenue and also result in additional interest savings of more than $700 billion. That $4 trillion is almost enough to offset the entire cost of the reconciliation bill that passed in July.
It's astounding numbers. Mark had mentioned that there are some other potential trade powers that the president could invoke, either in addition to or perhaps in place of IEEPA, depending on the court rulings. What are some of those powers and how might we see those roll out?
Yeah, so two of the most significant ones are refer to sections of the Trade Act that authorize their usage. There's Section 232, which relates to national security concerns, and Section 301, which relates to sort of general economic emergencies. And we already have Section 232 tariffs in place on steel and aluminum, copper, and automobiles and automobile parts. Those have brought in about $30 billion so far this fiscal year, and those copper tariffs are relatively recent, so there'll be some more revenue coming in on that side. With respect to the Section 301 tariffs, the most significant of those are the ones that have been in place in China since July of 2018. So there's a long history of imposing those, and those have brought in more than $33 billion so far this year. In addition to that, if the general authority to impose, say, the broad-based tariffs, the 10% around the collar, or 15% ones that the administration are most at risk, they would need to go to more Section 232 investigation type levies. And you need to have those investigations so you get a determination that there's an emergency before the tariffs can be imposed. And there's currently about 10 or so of those investigations already in process. So that's everything from semiconductors to pharmaceuticals, trucks and truck parts, aircrafts and jet engines, drones, timber, critical minerals, and silicone for solar panels and computer chips. I would expect that we would see more of those coming online if the general authority for tariffs under IEEPA are struck down.
Makes sense.
I have a quick follow-up question for both of you. What are you hearing from companies? Any questions, comments, concerns related to this?
Oh yeah, every day. We're of course tax people, but we're dealing with the tax and CFOs and other folks in the financial space, and they're very, very focused on this, especially companies that are obviously importing materials for manufacturing or for services or whatever. Any exposure, companies are asking about all this, and they kind of want to know kind of what are the possibilities. They're looking at things like this court decision. They're looking at some of the president's statements, some of the policy direction that they're going. Things like buy downs, some of these buy downs in the tariff deals, things like that. It comes up all the time.
Okay.
And I think from what I'm seeing is that it's clear now that the tariffs are going to be around for a while, and so companies are trying to think through how do they reorganize their supply chains potentially to mitigate the tariff consequences. Sourcing from countries with lower tariff rates instead of higher tariff rates, moving some production perhaps back to the United States as a means of addressing that, and also then thinking about their pricing policies, because eventually we would expect economists to have these higher tariff rates show up in prices. We've seen some of that, but not to the extent that we would have expected. And I think with the permanency or the long duration of the tariffs now being more apparently clear, we might see more of that in the future.
Karl, Mark, thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, in case you missed it, you'll find links in the description of this episode and on our website to Rohit Kumar's Week in Review.
Also included in the description of this episode is a link to an episode about the impact of OB3 on state and local taxes. And we're going to continue that discussion in another episode this week focused on how OB3 is putting a stress on state tax agencies. We appreciate you spending this time with us. Take care.